afternoon session of Day 2 in the Mindanao Peace Studies Conference 8, bearing the theme Resilience and Harmonization for Peace and Development in Mindanao. We are streaming live at FSU Butuan Facebook and YouTube Live. Simultaneous in this session is the paper presentations via Zoom with Ms. Rochelle Valencia as the facilitator. I am Arlene Floretta of FSUU, and I will be your facilitator this afternoon. Let me note that paper presentations in this session is also disciplinary. To facilitate a seamless flow of the session, may I remind everyone of the mechanics of the presentation. Each speaker is given 20 minutes for his or her presentation. Timekeeper will flash the remaining time in 10 and 5 minutes to queue for wrap-up. Please observe the allocated time so that the other speakers and the participants will also have the chance to ask their questions in the 25-minute open forum. May I request everyone to turn off your mobile phones or put them in silent mode. So at this point, let me begin introducing our first presenter. He obtained his Doctor of Philosophy in Development Studies, major in Education and Development, with cognates in Strategic Planning and Policy Studies and Development Communication. He graduated class valedictorian with a grade weighted average of 1.07 from the College of Public Affairs and Development, University of the Philippines, Los Baños. He was named as one of the Academic Achievement Awardees for being ranked 2 in the doctoral class of 2021 in the same university. He also obtained 18 units in PhD in Sociology from Koch University under the Erasmus Credit Mobility Scholarship. He also got his Master of Arts in Communication Arts from UP in 2018 with academic distinction, and his Master of Arts in Education, major in Educational Management in 2017 as Best Thesis Awardee. He finished his Bachelor of Secondary Education, major in English, cum laude in 2013. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome our first presenter, Dr. Ernesto L. Bastida, Jr.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Dr. Ernesto Bastida from Colegio Lonsod and Dasmariñas, and I will be sharing with you one of the outputs of my dissertation entitled Toward Educational Equity, an examination of teachers' implementation fidelity of the rights-based approach to indigenous peoples' education curriculum in Agusan del Sur, Philippines.
Hello, mic test.
To begin with, the Philippines has strengthened its commitment to the global goal of achieving education for all targets and the SDG 4, or quality education, through the adoption of indigenous people's education curriculum framework to empower indigenous people. The adoption has resulted in hiring teachers as a part of indigenous community, contextualizing curriculum, and localizing and indigenizing materials. However, despite the efforts of the Department of Education to empower indigenous communities, several indigenous peoples still face multiple barriers to experiencing the universal right to quality and appropriate education. In relation, it is being argued that the implementation of the culture-based pedagogy from the K-12 curriculum has not totally successful. In fact, the iPad curriculum did not or has not eradicated the negative experiences of indigenous learners, since this culture-based approach only emphasizes inclusion and participation through increased appreciation of IP identity, and it undermines the ultimate goal of IP communities, which is empowerment. To continue, according to Kanapuni, found out that even in Western culture-based strategies failed in reducing educational disparities between indigenous students and their peers and improving the positive and successful outcomes among indigenous students. And even one of the professors at the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, in her research, Malata Silva in 2017 argued that the present iPad curriculum cannot even address the basic needs of IP for cultural preservation, ancestral land protection, and even development of functional knowledge to avoid displacement. Therefore, in this study, we claim that the failure of the present culture-based iPad curriculum to respond to the needs, interests, and ideals and aspirations of indigenous learners was caused by the misutilization of a rights-based approach in education. The present iPad has not captured all the provisions stated in the law, as it only hinges on valuing cultural integrity and disregards other bundles of rights such as ancestral domain, the social justice, and the other one I forgot. For the autonomy for Institute for Autonomy and Governance emphasized that the IPRA can better realize IP well-being. Rosnon and Talib in 2019 explained that it is important for educators to address educational disadvantages and even the rights of IP in school. This is the reason why rights-based approach or inclusion of IPRA law in education is really essential. So for the objectives of this study, examine the teacher's implementation fidelity of iPad curriculum in terms of the following parameters: expected learning competencies, learning resources, learning space and environment, teaching methodologies and strategies, and assessment tools and procedures. So this is the quantitative part. For the qualitative part of this study, we examined the experiences of school stakeholders on the teacher's implementation fidelity of the iPad curriculum. Then after getting the quantitative and qualitative result, we merged the data through a specific approach. So we determined the extent of convergence and divergence of the quantitative and qualitative result. Well, the major objective of the study is to determine, thus, the curriculum or the present iPad curriculum really empower indigenous people if it only anchors on the cultural integrity or strengthening the culture and indigenous knowledge system of the IP communities. For the methodology, we adopted the convergent parallel research design to examine the teacher's fidelity to the implementation of rights-based approach to iPad curriculum. Then the research proposal was heavily evaluated by the protocols, NCIP guidelines, and of course the Data Privacy Act. And of course, when the time that I did immersion, in the Higaonon communities, I used the guidelines prescribed by PEPWA and Protasio in doing indigenous research. Although the said study was exclusively conducted in Higaonon communities, the result can still be utilized to other indigenous communities in the Philippines. So this is the framework of the study. So we determined the rights-based implementation in indigenous communities, specifically in Higaonon communities, in the municipality of Esperanza. So we had two data collection. For the quantitative side, we used the survey instrument. From quantitative side, we use the survey instrument. Respondents were elementary teachers in iPad implementing schools. On the other hand, we also use the qualitative data collection, okay, including the key informant interview, the focus group discussions, and semi-structured interview. Participants were NCIP official, DepEd officials, vice mayors, school heads, elementary teachers, tribal leaders, parents, and then learners. Then going back to the quantitative side, we only used descriptive statistics to analyze the data, whereas in the qualitative data analysis, we utilized the thematic analysis and consensual method. And the results of the two sets of data were merged using the NOSBOM social justice and human rights theory. Then we analyzed and interpreted the interface between the quantitative and the qualitative results. And the results of which were used to propose for the rights-based iPad curriculum. So for the quantitative results, I'm going to present only the table, and then for the interpretation of that, results reveal that teachers always value the spirituality and belief system of the learners to Magbabaya, the Supreme Being. They also implemented practice of giving localized materials and examples when discussing lessons in the classroom to instill in the minds of the Higaonon pupils the value of their ancestral domain as the basis of life. Also, they frequently consider the cultural background of the students to empower their subjectivity when designing lessons in the curriculum and planning for the school improvement plan. So that's for the first variable. For the second variable, for the learning resources, as you can see in the table, teachers frequently follow the procedures in the contextualization, policies, and protocols, such as consent seeking directly from the tribal leaders and making culturally sensitive instructional materials to ensure its appropriateness to the standard of Higaonon communities. And they refrain from implementing policies or practices that might discriminate indigenous peoples, and also that highlight injustices and exclusion in education. And for the third variable, for the learning space and environment, results reveal that teachers always implemented practices that intensively promote the rights of Higaonon pupils enumerated in April law to protect them from possible discrimination, marginalization, and even exclusion. It was also revealed in the table that teachers always establish a strong affiliation and partnership with various stakeholders to promote a fair-minded and collaborative environment where the rights of Higaonon pupils were duly recognized and their freedom to have supportive atmosphere is truly valued. And for the fourth variable, teaching methodologies and strategies, results reveal that teachers always respected the Higaonon's spirituality and belief system by asking the communities to perform ritualistic activities during school celebrations and relevant programs. It was also shown in the table that teachers frequently implemented instructional activities that truly reflect the daily community activities to strengthen Higaonon pupils' identities and subjectivities, which are essential to finally achieve the long overdue empowerment. And for the last variable, assessment tools and procedures, results reveal that teachers frequently used authentic assessments and that strengthen Higaonon pupils' civic responsibilities to their respective communities. Aside from authentic assessment, teachers also use performance-based assessment and various assessment tools and strategies. And teachers frequently used holistic assessment that give Higaonon pupils chances to clarify the intentions, assess themselves and others, and set goal for the improvement. And for the qualitative result, so presenting to you are the themes, okay, that we generated from interviewing different participants. So we differentiated the themes that we got from the semi-structured interview, then from the key informant interview, and then from the focus group discussion. Then we used the consensual methods analysis to wrap up the discussion in these three data collections. So for the semi-structured interview, okay, generally, it revealed that teachers explained lesson using Cebuanong Binisaya, which was the second vernacular dialect that Higaonon pupils were exposed to. They also made some adjustment in translating the recommended curriculum into actual learning experiences. Aside from that, using an explicit technique in classroom instruction offers a positive learning outcome because it stimulates the process of learning and it mirrors the traditional knowledge transmission of the indigenous pupils. And for the key informant interview, it was found out that iPad Focals affirmed that when teachers use native dialect in teaching, learners become more participative and interactive. They also mentioned that there are available indigenized materials such as big books and lesson plans that had been checked and validated by the Quality Assurance Unit of the Department of Education. It is also noted that to capacitate teachers with knowledge and skills appropriate to the iPad program, training workshop must be consistently conducted with the iPad coaches and representatives from the IP communities to ensure that whatever inputs, okay, they come up with would be relevant and appropriate to the setting or the context of Higaonon pupils. And for the focus group discussion, it was revealed that Learning activities and competencies in the state approved curriculum are too idealistic, adding burden both to the teachers and Higonon pupils. Such recommended activities in the DepEd curriculum are not applicable considering the level of knowledge and comprehension skills of the pupils. In terms of parental involvement, parents are sometimes reluctant to participate in school activities because they were busy working in the rice field for their food or activities that seem to be out of their knowledge and skills. It was also disclosed that history of Higaonos must be recorded for preservation, which in the long run will benefit teachers who do the contextualization. And for the merging of results, okay, for the merging of results of the quantitative and qualitative result, as you can see, to converge the qualitative and quantitative data, the 10 central capabilities enumerated by Martha Nussbaum in her theory of social justice and human rights were employed to serve as criteria for examining the teacher's implementation fidelity to rights-based approach. And as you can see, it indicates that there was a lack of teachers' curriculum fidelity to IPED in 6 out of 10 central capabilities, including the bodily health, bodily integrity, emotion, practical reason, play, and controls one's environment. The common features of these divergence or these capabilities is that it lies in the individual's personal reflexivity, subjectivity, and freedom. This only means that the lack of learners' engagement in the actual planning of the curriculum, instructional management, and even in the contextualization process and assessment tools and procedures, and the whole process of curriculum development has made the present IPED curriculum a new bottle for an old wine. Although it was recorded that culture-based IPED curriculum values collaboration between communities, learners are still seen as positive receptors of culture-based instruction. Hence, this makes the IPED curriculum implementation unsuccessful in terms of achieving its inclusive goals, as learner rights to design their own educational system was still not valued nor promoted. And for the policy implication, to respond to these disconnecting experiences, close coordination between the DepEd and NCIP would become a promising affiliation that positively impacts the type of education that shall be offered by schools to students. We also recommend that the inclusion of IPED learners, parents, and indigenous communities in instructional planning, aside from validation and for validation of the instructional materials, okay, the cultural integration, but also in the whole process of educational planning, from the selection of learning competencies, a range of learning areas and content and performance priorities. DepEd should open non-teaching personal items for those indigenous peoples who have the skills to create contextualized learning materials. Well, in that case, it could be parents or tribal leaders, which can be the partners of teachers in providing culturally responsive teaching. And for the recommendation, the concepts of rights should be meaningfully applied in the policy making to realize a responsive and relevant education for indigenous children and youth. The rights-based curriculum is deemed necessary to eradicate all forms of discrimination, exclusion, alienation, integration, and vulnerabilities in school in the mainstream society. And having four bundles of rights stated in the IPRA law incorporated in the curriculum, indigenous learners would become more empowered and dignified right holders. Therefore, the main recommendation is to develop a new curriculum development approach, shifting from culture-based curriculum to rights-based IPED curriculum, which is actually expected to lay down positive changes in all aspects of lives for indigenous learners, including social, economic, education, civic, and political. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Bastida. At this point, let me introduce to you our second presenter. She is an instructor of Father Saturnino Urias University. She graduated AB Economics in the same university and earned Master in Economics at University of San Carlos, Cebu City, and Master of Science in Econometrics at the University of Southeastern Philippines, Davao City. Currently, she is on her dissertation writing for PhD in Development Research and Administration. She has been involved in several research commissioned by the World Bank, Department of Interior and Local Government, and Center for Economic Policy Research. Friends, please help me welcome Ms. Belinda Ato Candelario.
Good afternoon again. So what I'm going to present to you is actually a study wherein we're going to compare or look into the condition of Mindanao against the other the condition of regions in Mindanao against the other regions in the Philippines in view of their resiliency, peace and order, and local resource income. As well as I'm going to look into the relationship of or the influence of local resource revenue to the resiliency and peace and order condition of regions in Mindanao. Let me start my discussion in view of the core concept or the core theory of this paper, wherein it is based on Buchanan 1950, wherein Buchanan says that there should be fiscal equalization so that each subunits or local government units can attain the standard or basic government services. Fiscal equalization, it means to say that, for example, if an LGU is not capable of, let's say, having this kind of service because of low income, then therefore the national, should transfer in order to provide these kind of services. So that is the aim of the Buchanan. There should be fiscal equalization. And this paper also argues that the very known SGLG, the Seal of Good Local Governance, and the CMCI, Citizen Communities Competitiveness Index, are the two assessments that we can use in order for us to look into whether the regions in Mindanao is comparison to the other regions in the Philippines, whether they have the same level of, the same level of how they implement their services. No? So I'm going to use this in my study. I'm going to use the indicators in the SGLG and Citizen Municipalities Competitive Index in order to look into the comparison of the regions in Mindanao and the rest of the regions in the Philippines. For the Seal of Good, for the SGLG, they have these dimensions, 7 dimensions. However, and then for the Seal of Good Governance, they have 5 dimensions. But in this paper, we will just be using the peace and order indicator or dimension and the resiliency indicator. So for the peace and order, these are the indicators being mentioned in the SGLG. If you try to look into the 6 indicators, how they're going to assess a certain LGU is 0 or 1. Meaning, 1, if you have complied all the indicators. If you have not complied all the indicators, then you will be 0 as an LGU. So the first indicator is logistical support to the PNP. Second is the firecracker regulation. Third is the Peace and Order Council, whether they have a plan, their fund utilization, and then their completion of the PPAs in view of the POC. And then whether they have organized and trained the BPATs or the Barangay Peacekeep Action Teams. Fifth is that the ADAC, whether there is an organization, there are meetings being conducted and they are being credited. What I'm trying to say is that per LGU, meaning if there are organization, if there's an ADAC organization in such LGU, are there meetings being conducted and then is it accredited? And lastly is an action on illegal drugs. We look into that, whether if there's increase of the cleared number of barangays or all the barangays are being cleared. Therefore, if a certain barangay, there's a decrease on the number of barangays being cleared, then you will have a 0 score. Okay? But if you have all or increase, then you will have a 1 score. Then we go to the indicators of resiliency. For the indicators of resiliency, the CMCI had actually 10 indicators. How the CMCI tend to measure the score for each LGU is actual minus minimum over maximum minus minimum. So how we compare the maximum, what is the maximum is not of the rest of the country, but per province. So for example, what is the maximum, for example, when we look into, first is on the land use plan, update of the CLUP. So for example, in the province of Agusan del Norte, what year is the maximum? Is it 2019? So then it will be compared to the rest of Agusan del Norte lang. Okay? And then we also have the second is the disaster risk plan, wherein these are the sub-indicators, presence of DRMP, are there executive or ordinances in view of the risk decision plan, and then budget allocation, and then are there updates of their plan. Next is, have they implemented an LGU-wide annual disaster drill? Okay. And then early warning system, it means to say that it's a presence of early warning system that integrates professional respondents and the grassroots organizations. Number 5 is on the budget of the DRMP, where it compares, again, the budget of the certain LGU towards its province. Then 6 is the local risk assessment, the availability of the geohazard maps of DNR, and also the availability of the risk and profile of the SWD. Then number 7, that 7th indicator under resiliency is that emergency infrastructures, the availability, whether they have ambulances, for example, the boats, the clearing equipments, evacuation centers, and the drainage system. So these are the indicators under emergency infrastructures. While for the utilities, this is under, again, resiliency, it is being assessed in the water, power, telecommunication, alternate route, and then fuel. Also, employed population is part of the indicator wherein how many number of trained respondents in a certain LGU. And lastly, for this indicator, we have sanitary system wherein look into the landfill, the garbage collection, the waste segregation, and recovery facility. So with that, I have this statement of the problem. First, I look into what is the condition of the regions in Mindanao compared to the rest of the region of the Philippines in view of peace and order compliance. Second, resiliency competitiveness. Third, locally resourced revenue. And then, second, this is my last statement of the problem. How can locally resourced revenue influence the following in view of the peace and order compliance and resiliency? So let's start with, with the methodology that I'm going to have. I had the quantitative approach when I use logistic and logic regression, descriptive in view of taking the proportion and averaging. Logistic regression is in view of if my dependent variable is 0 and 1, if we try to recall, the peace and order condition is 0 and 1. So I use that as in under logit. I also use ordinary least square regression. This is in view if the dependent variables are in ratio data. For example, resiliency index. Since it is a ratio data, then how I use the relationship between resiliency index and local resource income or revenue, I use it using ordinary least square. And also the data that I used the secondary data from the CMCI for the resiliency 2019, and then for the peace and order came from the SGLG or the BLGS government. Okay, so let's look into the peace and order compliance. So these are the proportion of LGUs complying to peace and order per region. So if we try to look into the graph, it's so clear that the BARMM has the lowest proportion of LGUs complying to the 6 components, aside from ADAC, no, but the rest, they are low for the rest of the regions and even to the rest of the regions in the Philippines. Also, if you look into that, Davao region has the highest actually percentage of peace and order compliance, wherein it is highest in most of the indicators. You can see that in the gray, that's Davao region. And then, if we try to look into, actually the rest of the regions are having low compliance meaning low proportion of LGUs that are complying with the action on illegal drugs. But it is good to note that Caraga is actually higher from the rest of the regions of the Philippines. Okay. Then, these three regions, the Northern Mindanao, Davao, and Caraga region, is actually having a similar condition with the rest of the regions in the Philippines. And I also looking into the relationship of whether if you belong to Mindanao, is it an advantage or disadvantage to have a higher peace and order index? So if you try to look into that, it's a negative. It means to say that if you belong to Mindanao, if you are a region or LGU belongs to Mindanao, it is expected for you to have a probability that you will have a lower peace and order index. So that's how we interpret about this logit regression. Then we go to the resiliency competitiveness. In the resiliency competitiveness, I'm sorry, I did not include the BARM because in the CMCI raw data, they only have 2 LGUs, so it would be unfair for them, no? So I just disinclude na lang the BARMM. So for this, we look into that. It's very clear that Zamboanga has actually the lowest competitive score in view of resiliency. But Davao, again, is the highest resiliency, has the highest resiliency index. And it's so clear that the resiliency index in view of budget for DRRMP, you can see there that it's only Davao that is actually similar to the rest of the regions in the Philippines, and the rest of the regions is actually having a very low budget. It means to say we are not that competitive in view of this indicator. So then we have, I also run a logit regression in view of whether is it a advantage, is it a advantage if you are a region belonging to Mindanao in view of resiliency index. As you can see, this is a very good result because you can see it that there's a positive relationship. It means to say that when you are a region belonging to Mindanao, it means to say that you have high probability of higher resiliency index. Because if you try to look at the data above, most the regions in Mindanao is actually similar, have a similar structure with the rest of the regions in Mindanao, in the Philippines. That is why having a positive relationship with the logistic regression. Okay. Then what about the locally sourced? What is the condition of Mindanao in view of locally sourced revenue? When you talk about locally sourced revenue, this is the revenue generated from the LGUs, meaning this is not the ERA, because we have two kinds of revenue, the locally resourced plus the ERA. But this includes ERA, meaning locally sourced, the taxes they generated, the fees that they generated, that's all. And then, so let's look into the locally sourced. Green is the rest of the regions in the Philippines. And as you can see, only Davao is actually higher compared to the rest of the regions in the Philippines. Davao is 22% higher than the rest of the regions in the Philippines. But if you try to look at the rest of the regions in Mindanao, has a very high disparity towards the regions, towards the rest of the regions in the Philippines. And then, if you look at also BARM with their locally resourced, the data shows that they are only generating, they have a disparity of 98% from the rest of the regions in the Philippines. And with that data, we can actually, this actually supports, statistics supports that if you are a region in Mindanao, if you are an LGU that belongs to Mindanao, it is disadvantaged. Why? Because you will have, it is expected for you to have a low locally sourced income. Meaning, if you are an LGU, it is expected that very low ang imong income in this condition, in this statistics nga output. So what is the influence now of the relationship now of the peace and order and resiliency toward, what is the relationship now of the locally sourced income or revenue towards peace and order and resiliency? So if we try to look at this one, there is a positive relationship, meaning the higher your local resource, you will have a higher probability of attaining peace and order compliance. There is also a positive relationship between resiliency and local resource, meaning the higher your local resource, there will be an increase of your resiliency index. Actually, if we try to calculate, if you will have an increase of 1 billion local resource, your index will have also an increase of 0.129 ceteris paribus. Therefore, both on the peace and order and resiliency, local resource can influence these two indicators. So let me go now to my conclusion and recommendation. So the regions in Mindanao are having lowest proportion of LGUs complying to the actions against illegal drugs. The BARM has is always having a lowest proportion of LGUs complying to the indicators under peace and order compliance compared to the rest of the regions in the Philippines. And so therefore, as a recommendation, the LGUs in Mindanao, especially the BARM, should consider the indicators under peace and order compliance as opportunities for improvement. When you talk about opportunities for improvement, it means to say that the LGUs should consider this and enhance this. They should focus on how to increase their compliance in this area. The next is that LGUs under the regions of Mindanao are having high probability of having a higher resiliency. And as I've said, this is a good condition for the Mindanao. And so therefore, there should be continued emphasis, meaning they should continue this kind of action. And perhaps they can look into play on where should they develop, but then they should not look into pouring more of the budget on resiliency because they are regions in Mindanao are resilient in view of in view of the CMCI nga index. This also gives us a good avenue that perhaps if there's an increase of revenue, we can push into the peace and order, because there's a low compliance on the peace and order. Then, budgets for DRMP has the lowest score among the indicators of resiliency. An LGU belonging to any region of Mindanao will have a high probability that you will have a low locally sourced revenue. Any regions in Mindanao compared to the regions in the Philippines will have a higher probability of non-compliance to peace and order requisites. This is due to a low locally sourced revenue. And so therefore, I have two revenue here. First is that we need to look into what are the significant, what are the significant bottlenecks in order for the Mindanao to increase their locally sourced revenue. However, if they could not, because this would be a long struggle on determining and to cope, if they could not really, there should be an immediate action in view of changing or probably developing horizontal intergovernmental transfer of the Philippines. It means to say that perhaps our era on how we compute it, on how much should be given to certain LGU, should not look into population lang, land, and then equalization, but also look into expenditures of the LGUs as well as the fiscal capacity. Because these two are not recognized or not silent in our era distribution on how we formulate, on how we give, how much LGU receives from the national government. Okay, and that's all. Thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you so much, Miss Belle Candelario, for that presentation. Are you still okay? Okay, moving on. Let me introduce to you our third and final presenter for this afternoon. He is an assistant professor in Father Saturnino Urias University, teaching economics and social sciences subjects. He obtained his master's degree in economics from Xavier University, Ateneo de Cagayan in 2018. At present, he is taking up his PhD in economics in Ateneo de Manila University. He has been involved in several research undertakings, and one of which was being a research assistant for the Mindanao Jobs Report Butuan City Analysis, spearheaded by the World Bank. He served as field supervisor for the Citizen Satisfaction Index Survey in Carmen and Las Nieves, Agusan del Norte, as well as in Sison, Surigao del Norte. It was funded by the Department of Interior and Local Government. He is also part of the technical working group for the refinancing of renewable energy in Butuan City, organized by the World Wildlife Fund. His research interest is geared towards urban economics. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome our third presenter, Mr. Joseph Elroy B. Casion II.
Hello, good afternoon everyone. So I am Joseph Elroy Casion II. So I'll be presenting my paper entitled Conflict and Economic Development, Some Issues for the Philippines. This is actually written under the supervision of Dr. Noel de Guzman of Ateneo de Manila University. So for the introduction, according to Zuber 2016, sustainable development is not attainable without peace, and there will be no peace without sustainable development. So basically, in the Philippines, we have two types of conflict, or even in the other countries around the world, there are two types of conflict. We have the intrastate conflict, in which it is an internal conflict between the government and some local rebel groups. And we also have the external conflict where interstate. So yes, that's interstate. So basically, as we all know, that there is actually a conflict between the claims of the West Philippine Sea. So that is actually can be classified as an external conflict. So given the conflicts of countries, internal or external, an estimated of $14.4 trillion in constant purchasing power parity, terms or an equivalent of 10.5% of the global gross domestic product, or $1,895 per capita, is the economic impact of violence and conflict of conflict on the global economy. This is according to the Institute of Economics and Peace 2021. The impact of conflict can be a loss by 2% to 8.4% of GDP, and it is costly to manage a crisis according to World Bank. UN and World Bank 2018 also mentioned that conflict prevention can be cost-effective. It can generate a savings up to $5 billion to $70 billion a year. On the other hand, according to Rowerder 2014, conflict contributes to poverty in different ways, including causing damage to infrastructure, institution, and in production. The destruction of assets, the breakup of communities and social networks, forced displacement, and an increase in the unemployment and inflation rate are some effects of conflict. So what is the goal of this paper? So the goal of this paper is actually to look into the theories that explains external and internal conflicts, and will attempt to relate the applicability of these theories in the Philippine setting. So basically, we have two theories to be discussed this afternoon. It's the basic resource conflict by Hirschleifer and the Boulding's model of spatial conflict. So basically, this theory is anchored by the game theory. It was actually mentioned by Baliga and Sostrom, But due to time constraint, we are just going to discuss the two theories of Hirschleifer and Boulding. So let's start with the basic model of resource conflict by Hirschleifer. In this paper, I used this theory in actually relating it to the interstate conflict situation in the Philippines. So according to Hirschleifer, the model or the basic model of resource conflict by Hirschleifer, it attempts to explain the trade-offs of war given its resources of two conflicting states. So basically, there is one, let's just say, a resource that is being battled or conflict by two states or two countries. When country A and B engage into war, the two players are in dispute to control a particular resource. It is denoted by the variable R. Aside from the disputed resources, each player will also have their own secure and undisputed resources, that is R sub A and R sub B. So due to their conflict, both countries A and B, can freely divert their undisputed resources to military resources. So basically, the undisputed resources of country A and B, because they will engage into war, they will allocate some portion of it to military spending. So, mauna siya, that is actually the military resources denoted by M sub A and M sub B to produce military good that can be used in the war. So, going back to the basic model of resource conflict, it can be assumed that each unit of resource diverted to conflict generates one military good. So from the undisputed resources, they convert it to a military good. This is the marginal product of the diverted resources. It can also be assumed that for the same reason that the fighting between A and B destroys a fixed proportion of the disputed resources, where the sigma or the fixed proportion of disputed resources is between 0 and 1. Hence, the amount of the disputed resources, that will remain after the fight is presented by the R tilde 1 minus sigma. The net resources of country A and the net resources of country B, which is represented by NR sub A and NR sub B, controlled by the players if fighting will occur, is presented in that equation. So for the benefit of time, I will no longer explain the equation. If country A and B will engage into war, both countries need to decide on the resources that they will allocate in terms of military resources. And to know the optimal resource needed to be allocated for military is presented by the equation below. So, to explain it in a more layman's term or in an easy way to understand the theory of Hirschleifer, there is actually a numerical example of the resource conflict model. So each player can potentially gain from a non-violent settlement of the dispute. If A and B fight, then the net resources controlled by each player is equal to 280. If fighting is avoided, there is an 80 units of the disputed resources will not be destroyed. This turned out to be a surplus available to player due to peaceful settlement. So Garfinkel and Skapperdas 2007 called this as the split surplus rule of division. In the split surplus rule of division, the players predicted to reach a peaceful settlement where each can obtain 320 units of net resources. The 40 unit difference is due to the settlement, and can be considered as an increase of growth or economic activity. So basically, the 80 unit that is actually being invested by the countries to military, if they will not engage to war, it can be divided by the two countries 40-40, and it can actually be diverted to other funding such as that can increase economic activity and economic growth. So the other theory that we will discuss, I will discuss this afternoon, is for the interstate conflict. And it's actually the Boulding model of spatial conflict. So Boulding created a basic model on conflict over a territory among state or non-state groups given the adoption of economic theory on spatial competition. The basic model of Boulding, we have player A and B have home bases. So if we can actually look into player A's home base is in L1 in the figure, and player B's home base is in L2. The home base of the player might be located in the country's capital if the player is the state, or in the jungle or in the mountainous regions if the player is a terrorist or a rebel group. The parameter D, or that is the distance between the player's home bases. As measured vertically in the figure, military strength that a player can project concentrates its power at a given point in a given geographic space. It is assumed that in the model that each player can maximum strength is at the player's home base. HF and KM, it's in the line, it's HF, then the KM, are relevant portions of A and B's power projection. The negative sloping line power projection of player is what Boulding called loss of strength gradient. There is a rate or the military strength decline as player moves from its home base. So basically, according to Boulding, player is very strong at their home base, but if they move away from their home base, it can actually, there's actually a loss in military strength. However, figure 1 shows that both players are strong in their home bases, but not in the, this is not true in the second figure. In the second figure, it is shown that the figure, player B is weaker at his home base than player A. In this case, A is conquering B is conditionally viable. This implies that B's survival depends on A decided to attack their home base. So basically, you can relate this in the Philippine government dealing with the rebels or the armed groups, because we can actually say that being on the Philippine government, they actually have the decision if they can actually declare to have an all-out war and just bomb let's just say the camps, no? But remember that there is also consideration like the civilians and etc. and other resources that will be need to be considered by the government. So basically, the second model is actually, let's just say that the rebels are actually dependent on the action of the more powerful group. But let's just say that the government cannot really just do, because there are really collateral damages that can be if they will just be very aggressive in dealing with the rebel groups. Okay, so for the benefit of time, we will not discuss this one. So let's now relate the theories in the situation in the Philippines. So basically, as I mentioned, that in the interstate conflict, we are going to use the basic conflict model of Hirschleifer. So there is actually a conflict between the claim of the West Philippine Sea. So the claim of in China, just to make the discussion short, China is claiming the area because of their 9-dash line. While the Philippines, we are claiming it because of our exclusive economic zone, in which on July 12, 2016, the arbitral tribunal released its decision in favor of the Philippines. So what is at stake? So this is the R, or the resources that is being conflicted with the two countries. So West Philippine Sea has very strategic location, which is abundant in both living and non-living resources. The disputed territory is also a large marine ecosystem, abundant in fishery resources that is estimated to produce as much as 1/10 of the fishing catch landed globally. It has an estimated of 5.8 trillion total trading passing through every year, and 11 billion barrels of oil and 100 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, which is very essential to produce energy and other resources, according to Quinto 2016. So basically, this is actually the resources being conflicted with the two countries. Now, because of this conflict, we can actually look into the increase of spending in terms of military of the two countries. So the Chinese government defense budget for 2022 is 229.5 billion in US dollar, which is a 7.1% nominal year-on-year increase. This is the highest increase of China's defense budget since the start of the pandemic. A 6.6 increase and 6.8 increase of the defense budget was recorded in 2020 and 2021 respectively. While in the Philippines, we only have a 7.87 increase, or roughly 4.39 billion US dollar, compared to the 229.5 billion US dollar of China. So basically, it can be shown that Philippines is quite at a disadvantage if we are going to engage war with China over territorial dispute. Applying the basic model of resource conflict, it is best for the Philippines to apply the split the surplus rule of division, where settlement can be beneficial for both countries ranging into war. If fighting is avoided, both Philippines and China can be on the advantage. No resources will be destroyed, and both can save military expenditure that can be used for other productive undertaking. Hence, diplomatic agreement for the two countries must be met or to apply the split the surplus rule of division. Now, in the intrastate conflict, the discussion will focus on how the Philippine government with this armed group, particularly the MNLF and the MILF and Abu Sayyaf, as well as the CPP-NPA, is dealing in the Philippine government. So the MNLF or the MILF, their goal is to have a self-identity or have a independent Moro nation. So actions from the government, they actually have the defensive war, and we have the peace negotiation, creation of ARMM, and the further expansion of the Bangsang Moro region. Well, if we talk about the spatial location of the MILF and MNLF, mainly they are focused in the geographic location in Mindanao. While if we go to the other group, which is the CPP-NPA, the goal is to defeat the Philippine government in favor of a new state led by the working class and to expel the US influence in the Philippines. So same, it's actually, there's actually war, defensive war, negotiations. There is actually a long negotiations or peace negotiation between this group and the Philippine government. And recently, there is actually the creation of the NTF-LCAC, which is very controversial. So I will not discuss that one. So the spatial location, the CPP-NPA is spread all over the country. So using the Balding model of special conflict, it can be shown that being congested in one particular area in Mindanao, like the MNLF and MILF, is weaker at their home base than the government. The survival of this group depends on the government if they declare an all-out attack to their home base. But then again, due to the trade-off, the government might want to compromise having peace negotiation than having an all-out war. Having armed groups spread across the nation, like the NPA, have been strong in their home bases and might lead into attack on other location once the government will attack their other location. Particularly based as pertain to the Balding model of special conflicts. As such also, peace negotiation again is the most viable solution to end insurgency. Unlike the peace negotiation with the MNLF and MILF, with the CPP-NPA seems not to be progressing. Some groups might actually... So in conclusion, Two models presented in this study, the basic model of resource conflict and the Boulding model of spatial conflict, has shown the trade-offs in engaging into interstate war or intrastate war. It can also be shown that engaging into war can be explained by this model and the application of the game theory. So using the basic model of resource conflict, the study showed that when two countries decide to settle their differences peacefully, a lot of resources can be saved and can be used for other economic activities that can foster economic development. Also, the model have shown reallocation of budget to military expenditures if both countries will engage into war. This can be avoided if the issues for both countries will be settled through diplomacy. On the other hand, the Boulding model of spatial conflict has shown on how spatial location for both parties as the government, its local insurgent, can influence their strategy in engaging to war. However, as shown in the evidences in the Philippines, that the government has not engaged into all-out war with its local insurgents due to to possible collateral damages, which is also being manifested in the model that the government and the rebel group can be weaker or stronger in their home bases. It is a call for the Philippine government to engage into war with these rebel groups, but it will be costly and damaging. Hence, the Philippines must choose to settle dispute peacefully. So peace indeed has a relation in economic development. Engaging into war, whether it is interstate or intrastate, can destroy peace and might lead to economic crisis. This has been proven in various countries with the presence of conflict and war, that they are experiencing high level of poverty and a stagnant economy. However, it is evident in the Philippines that there is a current local armed struggle as well as interstate dispute, but it seems that the best strategy for the Philippines to settle dispute is a diplomatic way to avoid casualties and economic losses. And that ends my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Cashuan, for that presentation. Quite a nosebleed for all of us who are not into economics this afternoon, right? All right. What about another round of applause for all our presenters this afternoon? So before we move on to the open forum, let me give a very short synthesis of the presentation. Dr. Bastida pointed out that the current IPED curriculum is still wanting to promote empowerment among IP learners. This is shown in the disengagement of learners in content, strategies, and assessment. He recommends that there is a need for the teachers and the curriculum developers and implementers to engage with NCIP to develop a more relevant curriculum for the IP learners. And there is a need to shift from culture-based to rights-based approach curriculum. While the presentation of Ms. Candelario talks about compliance of the LGUs towards delivery of basic services with indicators called from the Seal of Good Governance in 2019, it was found out that LGUs in Mindanao has a high probability of non-compliance to peace and order requisites due to significantly low locally sourced revenues. Finally, the presentation of Mr. Cashuan showed that there is a damaging impact of conflict to the economy of a certain nation. No one ever wins in any war. Thus, peaceful resolution could be the best option. So, daghang salamat. At this point, we shall be having our open forum. If you like to ask a question, please state your name and the agency where you are connected. You can also ask one direct and concise question, and if needed, one follow-up question. For those who are participating through Facebook and YouTube, you may likewise write or type your questions in the comment section. The Secretariat will keep track of them and will forward it to me. So there will be documenters who will record the process and the questions raised in this forum. So who would like to throw the first question? Yes, Dr. Lam from the ILG. You are recognized.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Facilitator. And good afternoon, and once again, good afternoon to my fellow co-participants. Fellow participants online and in site. My question is addressed to the presentation of Ma'am Candelario. Okay, ma'am. I was curious, ma'am, how you were able to merge or connect or harmonize the results of these so-called assessment programs of the government, these two assessment programs. One, the cities municipalities competitive index, the CMCI of the DTI, and the Seal of Good Local Governance or SGLG of the DILG, wherein the CMCI assess the performance of the cities and municipalities, while the SGLG assess the performance of the cities, municipalities, including the province. And then you were able to come up with the performance of the entire region, how you were able to come up with such result, wherein these assessment tools only assess those level of LGUs, province, cities, and municipalities. And just additional lang, ma'am, no, it doesn't follow po nga if a province, looking back to the SGLG, doesn't mean that a province fail, all its component cities and municipalities failed because it's an independent assessment. So it doesn't mean a province failed or its component cities failed. It's independent man na siya. So how you were able to harmonize the results of these two assessment programs and come up with a regional result, performance of the region result.
Thank you. As you can see, I've used the raw data. I did not use actually for example, in the CMCI, I did not use the index being formulated by the CMCI, but I used the raw data. The raw data from the CMCI is per cities and then municipalities, I agree. For the Seal of Good Governance, is also per city and even there is a per province. So how did I get it by region?
Yes, ma'am.
Did I get right? So I did, as I've said, in my data, I use averaging. So for example, in regions of, for example, in the Caraga region, I get the average of all the cities, municipalities in under Caraga region to get the region index or the region condition. Okay, and then also with your, is there one thing that I have not answered?
So averaging, ma'am, no?
Yes, I use the averaging.
How about the result of the province, ma'am? Did you include the result of the provinces
because
assessment?
we all take note that the province. I did not there are. As I've said, I get the raw data. I just use the cities and municipalities because one thing is that in a way, if you try to look at it, the cities and municipalities is actually in the provinces, we have the cities and municipalities. And so therefore, I just look into the cities and municipalities and did not look into the provinces. Although there is, as you can see, there is a certain model that I have presented a while ago that there were 81 samples only. There were 81 samples only. It means to say that data, I used it logit probability using province the data. Okay. As I have, and then I would just like to repeat that although I have not used in certain aspect, I have not used the provinces data, but let us take note that the provinces comprises of the cities and municipalities. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, thank you, ma'am. That's all, Madam Chair.
Does that satisfy you, sir? Thank you so much. Anyone else who would like to raise a question? Okay, while waiting, I got one question for Dr. Bastida. Sir, in your study, where do you think is the gap? Is it in the curriculum itself of the IP education or in the implementation? For example, that teachers are not IP or that they lack the knowledge, for example, on how to implement IPED on the level of the IP learners.
Thank you for the question. I think the gap lies in the approach of the curriculum because just like what I mentioned, learners are considered to be passive receptors of knowledge. For instance, in the validation procedures of the indigenous learning materials, the DepEd has just invited tribal leaders to validate materials, but they haven't, the DepEd itself has not trained tribal leaders to become assessors of learning. They are not trained to become curriculum developers because during the time that I immersed in Higaonon communities, well, I traveled in different barangays in the, of course, in the municipality of Esperanza, hinterland communities. And then what I've observed then is that tribal leaders they really have indigenous knowledge that must be incorporated in the curriculum. Therefore, there must be trained to become curriculum developers, and that the knowledge the knowledge of the community must not only integrated in the curriculum, but also other people related to the community, such as parents, such as datus, they must be engaged in the whole process of education. And in that way, indigenous learners will not be socially integrated. They will be socially included, because social integration is different from social inclusion, right? Integration may be because you are part of the system, but inclusion is that it means that you are part of the system and you have the right to govern the system. I think that's the main gap. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Bastida. So it was really clear that there is an inherent, there's really something wrong in the way the curriculum was crafted, not only in the implementation. Thank you. Is there any other question? Yes, Sir Lam, while waiting for the rest to throw their questions, take the chance.
Thank you, ma'am, for acknowledging again. Actually, this is a follow-up question to the presentation of Ms. Candelario.
Okay.
Based on the results, ma'am, no, I think it needs government action. I think you stated in your recommendation, ma'am, no? Now, why there's a poor generation of the locally sourced revenue of the LGUs, I think it needs the action of the government, particularly the NEDA. And its regional special body, no? The Regional Development Council, and including to talk about peace and order, and it also need to be referred to another special body of the region, the Regional Peace and Order Council. But my question is this: after this activity, are you willing to communicate your result of the study to these government agencies to help the regions of Mindanao, to utilize your study and to enable them to come up with a policy that can help the poor regions of Mindanao scale up or elevate their status, economic status, particularly the revenue generation at their local level? That's all.
It is always a yes, sir. Sorry. It is always a yes, sir. I'm really willing. Is that actually, if on my dissertation, it is related to this. I would be gladly to help, sir. And thank you for that recommendation as well to the offices of the NEDA. I recognize that they should also be one of the offices or agency that should look into how we can increase the locally sourced revenue of the regions or the LGUs in Mindanao. Thank you, sir.
Salamat, Ma'am Bell and Sir Lam. I got one question for Sir Casyon. Murag opinion. Do you think the present and previous administration is also considering the same theories that you have just presented to avoid more casualties and more?
I think, ma'am,
Okay.
hello. I think basically yes, but maybe we are just unaware that they are actually practicing these theories. But basically, if you engage into war, game theory is very much applicable, especially the spatial theory of building and the basic resource conflict of Hirschleifer.
Okay, so they must have some economists, what do you call it? Economists that use the same principle and philosophy. Thank you for the answer, Sir Joseph. Napabaylaing gusto mangutana? Going once, murag kaulion man siguro mo. Going twice. All right. Murag wala na gyud. So, thank you so much to our presenters. Now, let's give them a round of applause once again. And at this point, we will show our appreciation by giving the certificates. So, we would like to request VP Azura and Ma'am Bon to give them the certificates as well as the token. So let me read the first certificate. This certificate of appreciation is presented to Dr. Ernesto L. Bastida Jr. for the invaluable contribution as paper presenter in the research forum during the Mindanao Peace Studies Conference 8 with the theme Resilience and Harmonization for Peace and Development in Mindanao, held on November 22 to 23, 2022 at the CBE Function Hall, Father Saturnino Orius University. Given this 23rd day of November 2022 at Father Saturnino Orius University, Butuan City, Philippines. Signed, Reverend Father John Christian Yu Young, President of FSUU, and Reverend Father Randy Jasper C. Odchige, the Vice President for Academic Affairs and Research, FSUU. Congratulations and thank you, Dr. Bastida. Another certificate goes to Miss Belinda P. Ato Candelario. Congratulations and thank you, Ma'am Bell. Same certificate and token goes to Mr. Joseph Elroy B. Casyon, II. Daghang salamat and congratulations, Sir Joseph, Ma'am Bon, and Ma'am Zenny. At this point, I'm going to turn you back to our host for this afternoon, Miss Hannah Butcon. Are you here? I saw her. All right. Thank you so much. Salamat sa inyong pag-engage sa atong dialogue karong hapon.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much to all our presenters and our participants. While waiting for Father Randy, we would like to present to you the teaser for the Mindanao Peace Studies Conference Year 9. Okay, so that was our teaser for Mindanao Peace Studies Conference Year 9. So while waiting, we would again like to acknowledge our participants. For our on-site participants, under the government organizations, we have the Department of Science and Technology, PIA Caraga, National Commission on Muslim Filipinos, Center for Human Rights Education, Department of Environment and Natural Resources. For civil organizations, we have the Bantay Kita. From the academe, we have the De La Salle John Bosco College, PNU Mindanao, Northwestern Agusan Colleges, Asian College Foundation, Father Saturnino Urius of Trento, St. Paul University, Father Urius Institute of Technology Ampayon, CFC School of the Morning Star, Timber City Academy, Holy Child Colleges of Butuan, Merchant Marine Academy of Caraga, Father Saturnino Urius College of Bayugan, Asian College Foundation, Department of Education, St. Michael College of Caraga, St. Teresa College of Dandag, Sacred Heart School of Butuan, Immaculate Heart of Mary Academy Kitcharao, Bishop Haddon Institute Kabadbaran, SGIT Annex, St. James High School Buena Vista, Father Saturnino Urius College of Sibagat, Northwestern Agusan Colleges, Candelaria Institute, AMA Computer Learning College, and for the religious sector, we have participants from St. Peter College Seminary and the Missionary Sisters of Mary. And of course, we also have on-site participants, which are FSUU students, faculty, and staff. Thank you so much for being here with us. And for our on-site participants, we would also like to acknowledge participants from Department of Education, Bureau of Internal Revenue, Butuan Diagnostic and Medical Clinic, Forum ZFD, Surigao Education Center, Father Saturnino Urius College of Sibagat, Hinandayan National High School, Ateneo de Davao University, University of Southern Mindanao, Siargao Island Institute of Technology, St. Paul University Surigao, Northeastern Mindanao State University Cantilan Campus, Diocese of Butuan, Archdiocese of Cotabato, and the SK Federation Office. And of course, we also have online participants from FSUU students, faculty and staff from the main campus and the Morales campus. Thank you so much for being part of this conference, for the success of this conference. And again, thank you also to our presenters, to our working committee from the Secretariat, the technical team, the student assistants, everyone involved in making this conference a success. Well, let's give all of us a round of applause. Okay, but before we formally end this event, it is my pleasure to give the floor to the peace advocate who started it all. The conference started in 2015, made possible by this man who is no other than Reverend Father Randy Jasper C. Ochige, our Vice President for Academic Affairs and Research. He will give us a synthesis and closing remarks. Let us welcome him with a big round of applause.
Mayong hapon sa tanan. Ang akong assignment in this peace conference, una, to give some sort of a synthesis. Dili na tingali taas nga talk kay nabungog na ta sa daghan kayong mga talks. But the second task that I'm supposed to do is to close the conference formally before we go back to our various apostolates and advocacies. John Lederach, who is an author and a peace advocate, wrote a book called Moral Imagination, The Art and Soul of Peace Building. And in one of the pages in that book, he wrote the following words. He said, "People who listen the best and the deepest to others are those who have found a way to be in touch with their own voices." The last 2 days have been expended on listening to various frameworks, perspectives, practices, and experiences of the participants in this peace conference. conferences like this one as platforms of listening, I believe is part of our ongoing quest to get in touch with our voices. Justice Singh, in her keynote address, eloquently reminded us of the foundational principles of justice and inclusivity that animate any democratic society. She passionately reminded us the importance of recognizing the rights of those who are considered in the underside of history. No? So she was very, very clear, and she in fact quoted Chief Justice Puno on the importance of how justice and law should serve those who are considered the last and the lost, and not in the least, and not in any list in our society. But Justice Singh went farther ahead. She said, it's not just important to recognize the rights, but to give them the access to these rights. To give them access so that justice will really serve those who are in the fringes of our society. But then again, she moves a step further. She said, it's not just enough to recognize and to give access to those in the underside in relation to the Western legal frameworks. In fact, she says, and I'm very happy that she mentioned this, that it's important that we will give space to the customary laws, indigenous knowledge, systems, and practices of our brothers and sisters from the tribo. In our IP forum, which was ably facilitated by our friend and our guest speaker, Ms. Bismanos, in the many conversations that came about, we were made to be aware, or we were made aware of the many conflict lines among and within and in relation to our indigenous brothers and sisters. Foremost among them, nagbalik-balik sa istorya kagahapon, ang question on the indigenous political structures. So there were very good, passionate, and very open exchanges happening throughout the day. Another conflict line that came about was the question of the revenue and wealth distribution and management in the mining areas. In short, in general, there were questions and conflict lines about intragenerational justice and intergenerational sustainability. And so yesterday, there was a great discussion on extractive but also destructive industries in the many parts of the country, but especially in, as we mentioned, in Kanti 135 and in many other places in Caraga. Another set of conflict lines have something to do with the access to social services among our IP brothers and sisters. So the question of access to health, panahon sa COVID, daghan to yung mga katauanan nga ilang i-mention, nga mahadlok sila ng kitag pulis, kay basig bakunahan na sila, and they didn't believe. But in the end, this was a question of access to social services, health, and if I might add, the question of how sensitive the COVID policies of our government in relation to the cultural practices, knowledge, and systems of our brothers and sisters. Dako po na nga pangutana. Another question is on the conflict line in relation to access, that yesterday there was a wealth of repetitions and interventions in relation to how infrastructure should be provided to these far-flung communities for them simply to be able to ease the pain and the labor of transferring goods in their economic activities. They are also hungry. Kaganina nindot kay itong giingon nga, gigutom mi sa pag-uswag ug siguro na po'y kagutom nga gi-mention kagahapon about good governance. The importance of how government line agencies are supposed to help and provide the platform of support for the struggles of our IP brothers and sisters. Finally, yesterday, there was also a mention about how education can play a vital role in alleviating and developing, alleviating the plight and the development of the IP communities. However, we're not just talking about conflict lines yesterday. There were also impulses, little beautiful lights where we can draw strength and resource on how to be resilient. Yesterday, we signed a collective manifesto resolving to dialogue, cooperate, communicate, and work together. And to me, this is strength. This is a resource. Another important point that was mentioned yesterday, which I believe is a very good resource for peace building, is the importance of respecting the cultural practices of our indigenous brothers and sisters. Because in them, we find resource as they have found elements and power in resiliency. Kaganina, si Ms. Besmanos mentioned about the importance of their faith. Yesterday, Dato Makalipay also mentioned about how they are intimately connected, not just intimately, but essentially connected to the land, as if you can never define one without the other. To displace them and for them to be dispossessed of their land is equivalent to saying that they will be erased as a people in the cultural and historical memory of a country. Another strength yesterday which I found was the openness of the participants from the government agencies and other entities. And to me, these are building blocks where we can further the conversation, where we can move forward towards in our work in peace building. Today, very eloquently, our guest speaker, Ms. Besmanos, talks about the importance of research and data. And because of this research and data, Bantay Kita was able to clarify the differences and the dysfunctions of frameworks of understanding in the many factors that are affecting the advocacy, not just advocacy, but also in the wealth distribution and management in relation to the mining industry in the Philippines. While we continuously advocate for intergenerational sustainability, it's very important for us that our IP brothers and sisters are getting their fair share, the just share. I think you will agree with me that 1%, ingon pa ni Dato Makalipay, bukog ragyod ni. Bukog ragyod. Today also the academic papers attempt at expressing the academic supposedly voices which are supposed to resonate what happened on the ground, because that's a function of the academy of research, to resonate, to systematize, to in fact revise our frameworks given the experience of what's happening on the ground. And we have seen in the breakout sessions how our newly minted scholars and some old-timers express their views and their proposals and their frameworks. And to me, this is a healthy sign of a growing enterprise, but also of a growing conversation that can result to concrete, very concrete results. Because in the end, hindi pwedeng konsepto lamang. Kung nabuhay lang tayo sa larangan ng konsepto, walang saysay ang ating ginagawa. And so our concepts are supposed to be translated to reality. John Lederach, in that book, Moral Imagination, in the conclusion, says, peace building could be, or could in a sense, be summed up with, or as finding and building voices. In our enterprise, in this conference, 8 na katuig since 2015, nagsugod mi og gadtong murag putso-putso ra gyud pagsugod atong 2015, and now there is a good history already, no, of conversation. And our partners have been here, no, GIZ from ZFD, and we have engaged with so many scholars. We've listened to many ideas, and hopefully, after listening to them, we will be able to find and build our own voices and articulate them. Because if we use our voice, the academy is a very privileged place for debate, critique, revision of ideas, and giving birth to new frameworks. If we use our voice and if we raise them on behalf of those who are voiceless, think of the change that we can effect. Because in the end, diba, peace building is about social change. It's about changing the social structures of our country and our society. This would have not been possible without a team of dedicated people. And so, let me take this opportunity, no, as we close this conference, for me to thank first the Board of Trustees of Father Saturnino Urios University. I'd like also to personally thank the members of the FSU management team. I hope they're all here. Father John is here. Kanang putik buhok diha, no, nagpirma-pirma, no. Father John, thank you. Vice President for Administration Student Affairs, Engineer Zeni Azura. Our Comptroller, Attorney Rabon, she's there. Ilom-hilom na siya, pero siya ang nagbuot ani tanan, ha? Ang usa niya kapirma, makakaon o di makakaon eh. No, mo ni ang kalainan ani. And then, of course, our Director for Human Resource, Mr. Lyndon Buque. No? I'd like to thank in a very special way the core team of the Peace Conference. And as I call your name, please come in front. Kaya amo mong kantahan o happy birthday. No, bitaw. No, because I just like to honor them because without them, the last 8 peace conferences would not have been possible. Imagine 8 past conferences. So these people, they've been working and they've been doing the heavy lifting. No, kaya ako igor mo kumaingon nga kani. And then they execute it. So this would not have been very successful if not of their efforts. First, Dr. Sherlyn Alegre. Dali, Sherlyn. Jeffrey Karin. Nag-arrange pa siya sa itong panihapon. Kim Derrama. Dr. Arlene Floreta. Suzette Viñas. Dali, Suzette. Si Suzette is the one possible, the one in charge and responsible for our voice to be heard in the virtual space. Arlene Amora. And Janina Alfante. First, Janina. Ito sa office, so nagtrabaho pa. But ang naadinhi, I'd like you to please give them a round of applause because they are the ones who made this possible. Una pa din si Joseph Castion. Asa man ka, Joseph? Oh. He was also a presenter, so nagtabang pa siya organized, nag-present pa siya paper, usa na lang yun ang akong mapangutanan sa iya, how to be you. No? So, daghang salamat, og salamat usab sa tanang nag-attend, og tanang nagtabang aron mamahimong malampuson kining atong panagkukabildo mahitungod sa kalinaw dinhi sa Mindanao o sa Caraga o hopefully sa Pilipinas unya. Next year, I am inviting you for another conference which is supposed to dovetail. O, pwede na mo mahawa di ay. Salamat. Let me invite you in advance no, sa atong peace conference next year. We already have our teaser, which is supposed to dovetail the many conversations. No, unya gi kuan na nanay prelude presentation kaganina si Ma'am Vom, no, Ma'am Von. So next year we will focus on the extractive industries. No, along with the cause of Pope Francis in Laudato Si, but also because the COP27 has just been concluded, and really climate action is really very important and urgent for all of us. So to end this conference, let me ask Suzette to play once more the teaser for the next year's conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Congratulations. Thank you, Father Randy, for eloquently capitalizing what transpired throughout the entire conference, from the IP forum yesterday to the research forum today. Before we have our health break, I would like to remind everyone to please submit the evaluation, because that will be the basis for you to be given your certificate of participation. Thank you once again. This has been your host, Hannah Ibutcon. Thank you for joining us in this peace conversation. Have a great day.